There's something rather fascinating that happens when a person begins to wake up spiritually. They start to become quiet, not in all situations, mind you, but around certain people, around certain energies. And if you've experienced this yourself, you might have wondered, what's wrong with me? Why can't I just chat anymore? Why do I suddenly feel like I'm performing when I used to feel so natural? But what if I told you there's nothing wrong with you at all? What if your silence is actually the most honest thing about you right now? Let me explain what's really happening here, because once you understand it, you'll stop apologizing for your quietness and start honoring it as the wisdom it actually is. When most people interact, they're not really present with each other. They're exchanging words, yes, but underneath those words is a whole performance. We're performing our personalities, performing our opinions, performing our happiness or our struggles. We're like actors who've been playing the same role for so long that we've forgotten we're acting. The mask has become so comfortable that we think it's our face. But then something shifts. Maybe you've had a profound experience. Maybe you've done some deep inner work. Maybe life has cracked you open in some way. And suddenly you can't pretend anymore. You can't perform. The mask feels suffocating now. And when you're around people who are still deeply identified with their masks, you feel this enormous friction. It's like you're suddenly speaking a different language, even though you're using the same words. You see, when you begin to awaken spiritually, you develop what I call energetic literacy. You start reading the room differently. You're not just hearing words anymore, you're feeling the energy beneath them. You're sensing the fear, the need for validation, the hidden agendas, the unspoken pain. And this isn't some magical power you've developed. It's simply that you've become more present, more aware. You've stopped being so caught up in your own mental chatter that you can actually sense what's happening around you. And here's where the quietness comes in. When you're with people who are still operating from a place of unconsciousness, and I don't mean that in a judgmental way, we've all been there. You realize that much of what passes for conversation is actually just noise. It's people talking to avoid silence, people sharing opinions to feel important, people telling stories to get attention, people asking questions they don't really want answers to. The surface-level chatter that once felt normal now feels exhausting because you're no longer participating at that level. You're like someone who's learned to see in color being asked to appreciate a black and white television program. You can see it, but something essential is missing. I remember knowing a woman, let's call her Sarah, who went through exactly this transformation. She had always been the life of the party, the one with the quick wit and the endless stories. She could walk into any room and light it up. But after going through a particularly difficult period in her life, something changed. She came out the other side different, quieter, more measured, more present. Her friends were confused. "What happened to you?" they'd ask. "You used to be so fun." And she struggled to explain it because how do you tell people that you simply can't participate in superficial conversations anymore without sounding like you think you're better than them? How do you explain that when they're complaining about their boss for the 100th time? You can see that they're not actually upset about their boss. They're upset about something much deeper that they're not ready to look at. She started becoming quiet around certain people, not because she didn't care about them, but because she couldn't meet them where they were anymore. Her silence wasn't rejection, it was honesty. She was simply being true to what was alive in her in that moment, which was often nothing that could be put into small talk. This is what happens when you wake up. You realize that energy doesn't lie. People can say one thing, but their energy says something completely different. Someone might be smiling and telling you everything is fine, but you can feel the anxiety radiating off them. Someone might be asking about your life, but you can sense they're really just waiting for their turn to talk. Someone might be projecting confidence, but you can feel the deep insecurity underneath. And when you become sensitive to this energy, certain people start to feel times heavy, times to be around. Not because they're bad people, but because there's such a disconnect between what they're saying and what they're actually feeling, between their words and their truth. And to participate in that disconnect, to add your own performance to theirs, starts to feel like a betrayal of yourself. Imagine you're in a room where everyone is speaking very loudly. The volume is turned up to 10 on everything. People are laughing louder than necessary, talking over each other, filling every silence with noise. Now imagine you're someone who's learned to appreciate silence, who's learned to hear the subtle sounds, the breath, the rustle of fabric, the distant bird outside the window. In that loud room, you're not going to join in the shouting. You're going to become quiet, not because you have nothing to say, but because the only way to preserve your own inner peace is to stop contributing to the noise. Your silence is your refusal to participate in the volume war. It's your way of maintaining your own frequency in an environment that's vibrating at a completely different rate. But here's what makes this challenging. Society tells us that quiet people are shy, awkward, antisocial. We've been conditioned to believe that filling silence is a social duty, that being quiet means something is wrong with you. And so, when you start becoming quiet, you might feel guilty about it. You might force yourself to participate in conversations that feel empty to you. You might perform enthusiasm you don't feel. And every time you do this, you're abandoning yourself. You're choosing the comfort of social acceptance over the truth of your own experience. The awakened person understands something crucial. Not everything deserves a response. Not every conversation deserves your participation. Not every social situation requires you to be on. I want to be very clear about something, though. This quietness I'm describing is not the same as being judgmental or superior. It's not about looking at other people and thinking, they're so unconscious and I'm so enlightened. That would just be another form of the ego performance, dressed up in spiritual language. The quietness I'm talking about is humble. It's gentle. It doesn't judge others for where they are. It simply honors where you are. It's like this. If you've developed a sensitivity to certain foods, you don't eat those foods anymore. Not because you think they're bad, but because your body has changed. You've become more refined in your system. It's the same with energy. You're not judging the noise. You're simply unable to participate in it anymore without discomfort. And actually, this kind of quiet presence can be a gift to others, even if they don't consciously recognize it. When you're not performing, when you're not filling the silence with chatter, when you're not reacting to every provocation or joining every debate, you create space. Space for others to be real if they choose to. Space for genuine connection if it wants to emerge. Space for truth to reveal itself. Think of yourself as a still lake. When the lake is perfectly still, it reflects everything clearly, the trees, the sky, the birds flying overhead. But when someone throws a stone into that lake, it creates ripples that distort the reflection. Most social interactions are like thousands of stones being thrown into the lake continuously. Constant ripples, constant disturbance, no clarity. Your quietness is you choosing to be still. And in that stillness, you might actually see and understand things that people caught up in the ripples cannot see. Now, there are specific types of people who tend to trigger this quietness in awakened souls, and it's worth examining them because once you recognize the pattern, you'll stop questioning your response. First, there are the energy vampires. These are people who are constantly in crisis, constantly needing attention, constantly pulling on your energy to fill their own void. They're not doing this consciously or maliciously, but they're operating from such a place of lack that they unconsciously seek to drain others. When you're around these people, you become quiet because you've learned that engaging fully with them means losing yourself in their chaos. Your quietness is a boundary, a way of protecting your energy. Then there are the ego performers. These are people who are so identified with their image, their opinions, their stories, that there's no real person accessible beneath the performance. Every conversation with them feels like watching a rehearsed monologue. They ask you questions, but they're not really listening to your answers. They're waiting for their cue to deliver their next line. Around these people, you become quiet because there's no genuine exchange possible. Your words would just bounce off the wall of their self-absorption. There are also the shadow projectors. These are people who haven't looked at their own darkness, so they project it onto everyone around them. They need villains to explain their victim story. They need scapegoats to avoid looking at themselves. Around these people, you become quiet because anything you say can and will be twisted to fit their narrative. Your silence is wisdom. It's refusing to be cast in their drama. And then there are the truth resistors. These are people who are so committed to their delusions, their comfortable lies, that they cannot tolerate anyone who might reflect a different reality back to them. They might ask your opinion, but what they really want is your agreement. They might seem open to conversation, but they're really just looking for validation. Around these people, you become quiet because honesty would be unwelcome and pretense would be exhausting. Now, I want to address something important. Your quietness around certain people doesn't mean you should completely withdraw from all social interaction. That would be another extreme. And spiritual awakening isn't about running away from life. It's about engaging with life more consciously. The key is discernment. There are some people in your life with whom silence is a form of protection, and there are other people with whom silence creates space for deeper connection. You need to know the difference. With people who are genuinely on their own path of awakening, who are doing their own inner work, silence can be communion. You can sit together without words and feel completely connected. The silence isn't empty. It's full of presence, of mutual understanding, of shared being. These are the people you should absolutely spend time with, especially if your time together involves long stretches of comfortable quiet. But with people who are deeply unconscious, who are actively avoiding their own growth, who are invested in staying asleep, your silence might need to be more permanent, not out of judgment, but out of self-preservation. You simply can't pour your energy into relationships that require you to be less than you are. There's a beautiful paradox here that awakened people often discover: the less they speak, the more they have to say. By becoming quiet in situations that call for quietness, they preserve their energy for moments that truly matter. Their words become more potent because they're not constantly throwing them away on meaningless chatter. I think of it like this. Imagine a musician who plays every note all the time, without any rests between the notes. What you'd get is noise, not music. The rests, the silences between the notes, that's what creates the music. That's what gives the notes meaning and impact. Your quietness is like those rests. It creates space for your words to have meaning when you do choose to speak. People who speak constantly dilute the power of their words. But when someone who is generally quiet decides to speak, people listen. There's weight to it, there's intention behind it. But here's what you need to understand. Your quietness might make people uncomfortable. It will make them uncomfortable. Because in a world where everyone is performing, your refusal to perform is a mirror. It reflects back to them their own performance. And most people don't want to see that. They're not ready to see that. So they might call you boring. They might say you've changed, that you're not fun anymore. They might accuse you of thinking you're too good for them. They might pressure you to be more like you used to be. And this is where you need to stay strong in your truth. Your quietness is not a problem to be fixed. It's not something you need to apologize for or overcome. It's a natural response to becoming more conscious in an unconscious world. It's your system's way of saying, I can't participate in this anymore. I've outgrown this frequency. And the beautiful thing? When you stop forcing yourself to be chatty, to be on, to fill every silence, you create the possibility for real connection. You might find that you have fewer interactions, but the interactions you do have are deeper, more meaningful, more nourishing. You might lose some friends who were really just social acquaintances, held together by shared performances, but you'll find or deepen relationships with people who can meet you in the quiet, who can be real with you, who don't need you to be anything other than what you are. So if you're someone who's become quieter as you've awakened, honor that. Don't force yourself back into the noise to make others comfortable. Your silence is sacred. It's your truth. It's your way of being in integrity with yourself. And remember, the people who matter won't mind your quietness. They'll appreciate the depth it represents. They'll value the presence you bring, even when you're not speaking. They'll understand that sometimes the most profound things can't be said with words at all. The awakened person knows when to speak and when to be silent. They know that not every moment calls for words, not every question deserves an answer, not every conversation is worth having. They've learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is simply be present without trying to fix, advise, or entertain. Your quietness is not a weakness. It's not a social failure. It's not something wrong with you. It's your soul refusing to play a game it has outgrown. It's your spirit choosing truth over performance. It's your consciousness recognizing that some spaces are not meant for your energy, and that's perfectly fine. So be quiet when you need to be quiet. Let others misunderstand if they must. Stay true to what you feel, to what you know, to what is authentic for you in each moment. Your silence speaks volumes to those who have ears to hear it. And for those who don't, well, they're not your people anyway. The spiritually awake person understands that sometimes the highest form of communication is no communication at all. Sometimes the deepest connection happens in the space between words. Sometimes the greatest wisdom is knowing when to speak and when to simply be. Your quietness is your superpower. It's your protection. It's your truth. And it's exactly what you need right now, in this moment, as you continue to awaken to who you really are beneath all the noise, all the performance, all the social expectations. So breathe into your silence, rest in it, trust it. It knows something that words have not yet learned to express. And that something is worth honoring, worth protecting, worth living from. Because in the end, the awakened person realizes that they are not here to please everyone, to entertain everyone, to be accessible to everyone. They are here to be true. And sometimes, often, being true means being quiet around certain people. And that, my friend, is not just okay, it's sacred.